A stormy night, an empty rural road, and a lone ambulance returning from a late call out of nowhere. A wild Mustang appears standing in the middle of the road, blocking its path. The driver slams the brakes ready for the horse to bolt, but it doesn't move. Instead, he stays stamping his hub sand, letting out a desperate cry. What could it possibly want? What the paramedics discover when they follow him will leave you speechless. Stay with us for a story of courage, instinct, and an unbreakable bond. The night was unusually dark, with thick storm clouds covering the moon and stars. Rain pounded against the windshield of the ambulance as it made its way down a deserted rural road inside EMT, and Jack were relieved to finally head back to the station. After a long day of calls, feels like this storm came out of nowhere. Jack muttered, his hands gripping the steering wheel as the wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour. Ellie glanced at her phone, the screen lighting up. Her tired face weather app said it would pass by midnight. Guess they were wrong. Typical. The radio crackled faintly with static as the ambulance navigated the narrow, winding road. Trees lined the edges, their branches swaying wildly in the wind. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance as suddenly Jack slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt. Ellie jolted forward, her hand flying to the dashboard to steady herself. What the standing directly in the middle of the road, illuminated by the ambulance's headlights, was a horse, a wild Mustang. His dark coat was soaked, his mane clinging to his neck as the rain poured down around him. He stood tall and unyielding, his hooves planted firmly on the ground as she stared directly at the ambulance. Is this really happening right now? Jack muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Ellie's eyes widened as she leaned forward, her heart racing. Why isn't the moving? Shouldn't the be running away? Jack honked the horn, expecting to bolt, but Mustang didn't flinch. Instead, held out aloud, desperate whinny, his ears flicking back and forth as she pawed at the ground. His behavior was unlike anything Ellie had ever seen. Jack, wait, she said, placing a hand on his arm. Something's wrong. Jack frowned. It's a wild animal. Ellie, for all we know, it's just spooked by the storm. No, Ellie said firmly, her gut telling her. Otherwise, look at him. He's not running away. He's waiting, almost like he wants something, Jack. He hesitated, his foot hovering over the gas pedal. You're telling me this horse is trying to get her attention, Ellie said, unbuckling her seatbelt. And I think we need to figure out why before Jack could argue. Ellie grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the storm. The rain immediately soaked her clothes, but she didn't care. She approached the man cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He there, Big Eyes, he said softly, her voice barely audible over the storm. What are you doing out there? The Mustang's ears swiveled toward her, his body, tense but unmoving, held out another whinny, his breath visible in the cold night air. Then, to Ellie's astonishment, had turned and took a few steps away from the ambulance before stopping to look back at her. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest. Jack, she called over her shoulder. I think he wants us to follow him. Jack rolled down the window, rain splashing onto his army. You've got to be kidding me, I'm serious. Ellie said, turning back to the horse. Look at him. He's trying to lead us somewhere. Jack sighed, throwing the ambulance into park. This better not be some wild goose chase. Ellie climbed back into the passenger seat, water dripping from her hair. Just drive slowly. If he stops, swap. The Mustang began to move, trotting ahead of the ambulance with a sense of urgency. Jack followed cautiously, his headlights illuminating the horse's muscular frame as shelled them off the main road and onto a muddy trail. This is insane, Jack muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. Asked the ambulance, as struggled against the slippery terrain. What kind of horse does this? The kind that needs help, Ellie replied. He has fixed on the Mustang. Just keep going. After several minutes, the Mustang came to a sudden halt, this body tense. She turned to face them. Ellie and Jack stopped the ambulance and stepped out, the rain still pouring, as they grabbed a flashlight and followed the horse's gaze. That's when they saw what a small, frail foal collapsed in the mud, its tiny body trembling with cold and exhaustion. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she ran toward their boots sinking into the wet ground. Oh my God, she whispered. Jack, it's a baby. The Mustang stood nearby, letting out a soft mourning. Fwinny, she nudged the foggantly with his nose. Hands trembled as she placed the Montefo's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was weak, but it was there when need to move fast, she said, looking up at Jack. Get the stretcher. This little one won't survive out here much longer. Jack, running back to the ambulance as Ellie stayed with the Mustang, paced nervously, his dark eyes filled with worry as she watched every move. Ellie made Jack return quickly with the stretcher's boots sliding on the wet mud as she made his way toward Ellie. The rain pounded relentlessly, soaking both of them to the bone. The foss, still trembling on the ground, let out a weak, pitiful whimper that made Ellie's heart clench beside her. The Mustang remained close, his eyes fixed. One every movement she made. He won't make it. If we don't act fast, Ellie said, her voice trembling as she carefully draped a dry blanket over the foe's fragile body. We need to get them out of the cold. Jack crouched beside her, setting the stretcher down. Let's lift him together slowly. The Mustang let out a sharp snort, stepping closer, his ears pinning back for a brief moment. Ellie held up a hand, speaking softly. It's okay, big guy. We're trying to help. To her relief, the Mustang backed off slightly, but his watchful gaze never wavered. Together, Ellie and Jack gently lifted the foon to the stretcher. The little one barely moved its legs, limp and its breath shallow. Ellie kept a hand on its neck, murmuring words of comfort as they carried the stretcher back to the ambulance. The Mustang followed his hooves, sinking into the mud with each step. Jack glanced over his shoulder, muttering, "He's not leaving." Ellie shook her head. No, he's staying with his baby. When they reached the ambulance, Jack opened the back doors and helped Ellie secure the foe inside. The interior was warm and dry, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. Ellie quickly grabbed a heating pad from the medical kit and placed it under the fowl, wrapping another blanket around its small body. Pulses weak, but it's there, Ellie said, her voice tight with urgency. We'll need to keep monitoring him until we get back to the station. Jack clammed into the driver's seat, slamming the door against the wind. And what about him? Asked, nodding toward the Mustang, who stood just outside the ambulance, his body drenched but unwavering. Ellie leaned out of the back doors, meeting the Mustang's intense gaze. He's not going anywhere. Let's drive slow and let them follow. Jack hesitated, then nodded. All right, but this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. Ellie smiled faintly. She closed the doors and settled beside the fowl, come to life with animals. Sometimes they're braver than. Where the ambulance began to move its stire, struggling against the slippery road as Jack navigated the muddy trail back toward the main road. The Mustang trotted behind them, his powerful strides never faltering despite the harsh conditions. Ellie kept glancing out the window, her heart swelling with a mixture of awe and admiration. She'd never seen a horse like him. So determined, so protective inside. The fox stirred slightly, its tinny legs twitching under the blanket. Ellie leaned closer, her voice off. You're going to be okay, little one. Just hold on. The drive felt like an eternity, every bump and turn sending jolts of worry through Ellie's chest. But finally, the familiar lights of Ridge View Station came into view, glowing faintly through the rain. Jack pulled into the lot and parked under the awning, the sound of the storm muffled by the roof overhead. Ellie jumped out, opening the back doors as Jack grabbed another blanket. The Mustang skidded to a halt beside the ambulance, letting out a low, anxious whinny. As she watched Ellie lift the foal from the stretcher. It's okay, Ellie murmured to the Mustang as she carried them toward the stable at the back of the station. We're going to take care of him. The stable was small but warm, with fresh hay covering the floor. Ellie gently set the foal down on a bed of straw, adjusting the heating pad and blankets to keep him warm. The foal let out a faint eyes, fluttering open for a brief moment before closing again. The Mustang stood just outside the stable door, his large frame filling the entrance. Jack stepped forward, holding out a bucket of water. You thirsty, big guy? Hesked. The Mustang sniffed the bucket cautiously before taking a few slow sips. Jack glanced at Ellie, shaking his head in disbelief. He's incredible. I've never seen a wild horse act like this. Ellie smiled as she stroked the foe's man, her voices of, "There's not just a wild horse, he's a father, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to save his baby." The Mustang let out a soft snort, his ears flicking toward Ellie, as though he understood him. This gaze, her heart swelling with a newfound respect. You've done your parts, he whispered. Now, it's our turn. The rain began to ease as the storm rolled past, leaving the world soaked and glistening under a pale gray sky. Inside the stable, the foal lay curled on the soft bed of straw, its breathing steady but shallow. Ellie stayed by its side, her hand resting gently on its small, fragile body. The Mustang stood just outside the stable, his dark eyes never leaving the foe. Jack leaned against the door frame, watching as Ellie worked. How's he doing? Hesked, his voice low, Ellie's eye brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. He's stable for now, but he's not of the woods. Yet this dehydrated, malnourished, and cold. If we hadn't found him when we did. Her voice trailed off, the thought too painful to finish. Jack nodded, his gazes shifting to the Mustang. And what about him? He hasn't moved from that spot since we got there. Ellie glanced over her shoulder at the Mustang. Her tightening has stood tall, and still, his ears flicking at every small sound, his body a wall of protection between the foe and the outside world, even now soaked and exhausted from the storm. Her radiated strength and determination. He's not leaving, Ellie said softly, not until he knows his baby is safe. Jack crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. He's a wild animal. Ellie, at some point, instinct is going to kick in and he's going to bolt. No, Ellie said, firmly meeting Jack's skeptical gaze. He's not just any wild horse. Look at him. He came to us lusher and stayed the whole time. He's not running. He's fighting for his baby. Jack didn't argue, but the doubt lingered in his expression. I just hope you're right. The hours ticked by, and Ellie worked tirelessly to care for the falls. She cleaned its wounds, administered fluids, and kept it warm under layers of blankets and heating pads. The Foster read, occasionally letting out soft, pitiful noises that broke Ellie's heart each time. The Mustang would let out a low comfort, in Winnie his presence a steady reassurance as night fell. Ellie's atone a bale of hay, her exhaustion catching up with her. The stable was quiet, except for the soft rustle of the foe's breathing and the occasional snort from the Mustang. Jack had gone to grab some food, leaving Ellie alone with her thoughts. She stared at the Mustang, her mind replaying the events of the night before the way he had appeared on the road, his desperate cry for help, his unwavering determination to lead them to the fall. It was nothing short of extraordinary. You're a miracle, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You knew exactly what to do. You saved him. The Mustang's ears twitched and he turned his head to look there for a moment. Ellie felt as though he understood her words, as though he could feel the gratitude and admiration radiating from her. She smiled, tears welling in her eyes. You're there, isn't he still alive? Jack returned a short while later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a bag of sandwiches. Thought you could use this, he said, handing one of the cups to Ellie. Thanks, she said, taking a grateful sip. The warmth spread through her, easing the chill that had settled in her bones. Jack sat down beside her, his gaze drifting to the Mustang. Still hasn't moved. Huh. Ellie shook her head. No, I don't think he will. Jack took a bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. You know, I've seen a lot of things in this job, but I've never seen anything like this. That horse, he's something else. Ellie smiled faintly. He's not just a horse, Jack, he's a father, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to protect this baby. The Mustang let out a soft snort as though agreeing with her. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. All right, you win, he's a hero. The night passed slowly, but the foe began to show signs of improvement. Its breathing grew stronger, and it stirred more frequently, lifting its head and nuzzling against Ellie's hand. Each small movement filled Ellie with hope, and she found herself whispering words of encouragement. You're doing so well, little one. Just keep fighting. The Mustang stepped into the stable for the first time, his hooves clinking softly against the wooden floor. Ellie froze, her breath catching in her throat as she approached. Hallowered his head, his nostrils flaring, as she sniffed the fothen with a soft, trumbling sound. He nuzzled the fog in his eyes, filled with an unmistakable tenderness. Ellie felt tears streaming down her face as she watched the interaction. It was a moment she would never forget. A father's love, pure and unconditional, expressed a language beyond words. Jack stood silently beside her, his usual skepticism replaced with a "we, you were right." They said quietly, he's not leaving. Nova. Ellie smiled through her tears, her heart's welling with a mix of relief and admiration, and neither among high. The morning sun rose over Ridge View Station, casting a warm glow on the soaked fields. The storm had passed, leaving behind a calm and serene landscape inside the stable. The fowl was beginning to stir, more often, its fragile body slowly regaining strength. Under Ellie's watchful care, the Mustang, ever the vigilant protector, stood nearby, his dark eyes never straying far from his baby. Ellie felt a surge of hope. As she watched the foal lift its head and let off an inquisitive whimper, she crouched beside it, gently stroking its neck. You're getting stronger, she whispered. That's it, keep fighting. Jack entered the stable with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, his usual skepticism replaced by quiet admiration. Looks like the little one's a fighter, he said, handing Ellie a mug. Ellie smiled, her fingers still gently brushing the foe's man. He's got this, Dad. Spirit. The Mustang hasn't left his side since we found them. Jack leaned against the stable door, his gaze drifting to the Mustang. He's not just watching over him, he's learning to trust us. That's not something you see every day in a wild horse. The Mustang, as if sensing their conversation, let out a soft snort and stepped closer to the fall. He lowered his head, nuzzling the little one gently before turning his gaze to Ellie. It was a moment of silent communication, a bond that transcended words, but Ellie knew their time at Ridgeview Station was running out. The foe was on the path to recovery, but he wasn't ready to survive on his own, and the Mustang, while protective and calm, now would eventually need the freedom he was born to have. They couldn't stay here. Forever, we need to figure out the next step. Ellie said, her voice heavy with emotion. The foe's doing better, but he's not ready to go back into the wild, and separating them would be cruel. Jack nodded, his expression serious. I've been thinking about that. There's a wildlife sanctuary a couple of hours from here. They specialize in Mustangs and their offspring. It might be the best option for both of them. Ellie's heart ached at the thought of saying goodbye, but she knew Jack was right. The sanctuary would provide the care and space they needed to thrive. Do you think they'll take them, Buth? She tasked. I'll make some calls. Jack said if anyone can give them a good home, it's that place. The Mustang snorted softly, his ears flicking toward Ellie as though he could sense her unease. She smiled at him, her voice is soft and reassuring. We're going to make sure you're both safe. I promise. The day passed in a blur of phone calls and preparations. Jack confirmed that the sanctuary was willing to take the Mustang, and his phone, the staff there were already preparing for their arrival. Ellie felt a mix of relief and sorrow. She was grateful they had found a solution, but the thought of letting them go was almost too much to bear when the time came to load them into the trailer. Ellie felt the nerves tighten. The Faust small and fragile, but cooperative, allowing Ellie to guide him onto the trailer with minimal resistance. The Mustang, however, was another matter entirely. His instincts as a wild horse made him wary of enclosed spaces, and his protective nature only heightened his anxiety. Take it slow, Ellie said, holding out a hand as she approached the Mustang. It's okay. We're not going to hurt you. The Mustang shifted his weight, his ears twitching back and forth. He'll tout a low, uncertain whinny, his dark eyes scanning the trailer. Ellie moved carefully, her voice steady and calm. I know it's scary, but your baby's already inside. He needs you for a moment. The Mustang seemed to hesitate, his powerful body tense with uncertainty. Then with a deep snort, took a cautious step forward. Ellie's heart leapt as she watched him move, his deliberate but steady. That's it, she whispered. You're doing great. It took several minutes. But eventually, the Mustang stepped fully into the trailer. Ellie secured the gate behind him, her hands trembling with a mixture of relief and awe. She turned to Jack, who was watching with a look of disbelief. I can't believe he just walked a mile here. His eyes glistening with tears. She trusts us, that's everything. As the truck pulled away from Ridgeview Station, Ellie's in the back of the trailer, keeping a watchful eye on the Mustang, and his foe, the little one, was curled up beside his father, his breathing steady and strong. The Mustang stood protectively over him, his body swaying slightly with the motion of the vehicle. Ellie couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had taken together. The Mustang had defied every expectation, risking everything to save his baby and placing his trust in strangers when it mattered most. The drive to the sanctuary was long-winding through rolling hills and quiet plains. The hum of the truck's engine was steady, blending with the rhythmic sound of rainwater dripping from the trailer. Ellie's in the back of the trailer here. Here he's locked on the Mustang, and his father, little one, rested quietly on Blanket's tinny body, pressed close to its father's legs. The Mustang stood tall, his gaze flicking to Ellie occasionally as if to reassure himself she was still there. He's amazing, Ellie murmured softly. She reached out, their hammering just in chest from the Mustang's damp coat. Head didn't flinch, instead held out a soft, snorthy swivel in toward her. The trust between them had grown over the last few days, but it was still fragile. Every interaction felt like a gift, a reminder of the delicate balance between fear and hope. Ellie felt honored to be part of their journey, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on her chest. Jack's voice crackled through the intercom. Ellie, we're about 20 minutes out, you holding up back there? Ellie pressed the button to respond. We're good, they're calm, good. Jack replied, the sanctuary is expecting us. They've got a special area set up for them, plenty of space, water, everything they'll need. Ellie's eyed, her heart aching at thought of saying goodbye, thanks. Jack, the sanctuary came into view not long after. A sprawling property surrounded by endless fields of green wooden fences stretched across the landscape, enclosing large paddocks where horses grazed peacefully. In the distance, a red barn stood against the backdrop of a clear blue sky, its rustic charm inviting and warm. Ellie felt a lump rise in her throat as the truck slowed and turned into the sanctuary's gravel driveway. A group of handlers was waiting by the barn, their faces lit with curiosity and anticipation. Among them was the sanctuary's director, an all-woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Jack parked the truck, and Ellie opened the trailer doors carefully, the fostered letting out a soft whimper, and the Mustang stepped protectively over him, his body tense. Ellie held up a hand, speaking gently. It's okay, you're safe here. Suzanne approached slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. Ellie, she asked, her voice soft but confident. Ellie nodded, stepping aside to allow Suzanne a better view of the Mustang and his foe. This is them, Ellie said, her voice trembling slightly. The foe's still recovering, but he's doing much better. And the Mustang, he's been incredible. Susan's eyes softened as she took in the sight of the two horses. They're beautiful, she said, and they're lucky to have had you. Ellie swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. We were lucky to have them, she said quietly. The process of unloading the horses was slow and careful. Ellie worked closely with Suzanne and her team, guiding the foot of the trailer first. The little one wobbled slightly on its legs, but remained steady, its wide eyes taking in the new surroundings. The Mustang followed cautiously, his ears flicking back and forth as she stepped onto the gravel. His powerful frame radiated tension, but he stayed calm, his trust in Ellie evident in every movement. Susan Ellied to a large paddock near the barn, its open space filled with soft grass and a small water trough. Ellie walked beside the Mustang, her hand lightly resting on his neck. "This is your new home," she said, softly. "You're going to love it there." When they reached the paddock, the Mustang heated at the gate. Ellie paused, giving him time to adjust. She could feel the weight of the moment, the unspoken understanding that this was a turning point for both. "Off the mitts, okay," she whispered. "You're free." Now the Mustang let out a deep rumbling breath, his ears swiveling as she stepped forward, the followed trotting clumsily into the grass before collapsing in a playful heap. The Mustang moved to stand over him, his posture relaxed but vigilant. Ellie leaned against the fence, tears streaming down her face. As she watched them, Susan joined her voice, gentle. "You've given the Masacund." "Chance," she said, "that's everyone gets." Ellie nodded, her chest tightening. "I just want them to be happy." "They will be," Susan said. "This is where they belong." The Mustang lifted his head, his gazes weeping across the open field for the first time. Ellie's a wag glimmer of something she hadn't noticed before. Peace. He looked back at her, his dark eyes meeting her son last time. It was a silent goodbye filled with gratitude and understanding. Ellie placed a hand on her heart, her voice trembling. "You're free now, take care of each other." The Mustang and his foe adjusted quickly to their new surroundings, finding comfort in the sanctuary's wide open pastures and gentle care from the fence. Ellie watched them explore the paddock, the fox trotting more confidently with each passing minute. The Mustang remained close, his protective instincts still strong, but there was a note ease in his movements, now a sense of safety he hadn't displayed before. Ellie's eyed her heart Evie, yet full as she leaned against the wooden rail. "They're going to be okay," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it even more true. Jack walked up beside her, his boots crunching on the gravel. "They're better than okay, look at them." He gestured toward the Mustang, who was grazing peacefully, while the fop playfully nipped at this tail. "That's a picture of freedom." Ellie smiled through her tears. "I still can't believe we got there. The way he found yous, it's like he knew exactly what he was doing." Jack nodded, his expression soft. "I've been thinking about that too. Hadn't just trust us, she had a plan. Most wild horses would have run, but not them. He put everything on the line for his baby. That's what makes him special." Ellie said, "He's not just a survivor, he's a protector, a father." Suzanne approached them from the barn, holding a folder filled with papers and photographs. "I thought you might like to have these," she said, handing the folder to Ellie. "We take regular updates of all the horses shear, and I'll make sure you get photos and reports on these too." Ellie opened the folder, her breath catching at the sight of the first photo. It was a beautiful shot of the Mustang and his fox standing side by side under the soft glow of the morning sun. The foe's small frame leaned against this father's strong legs, their bond palpable even in a still image. "Thank you," Ellie said, her voice trembling. "This means so much to me." Susan smiled warmly. "You've given them a chance at life. The least we can do is keep you connected to their story." Ellie spent the rest of the afternoon at the sanctuary watching the Mustang and his foe settle into their new home. She stayed until the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the fields in shades of orange and gold. As the foe curled up in the grass, the Mustang stood guard, his silhouette strong and serene against the setting sun. "It's time," Jed softly, placing a hand on Ellie's shoulder. "We should head back." Ellie nodded, her heart aching at the thought of leaving, but knowing it was the right thing to do, she walked to the edge of the paddock, last time her fingers brushing the wooden rail. The Mustang lifted his head, his ears flicking toward her. Their eyes met, and Ellie felt a wave of emotion crash over her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The Mustang let out a soft trumblings north, this way of acknowledging her words. Ellie smiled through her tears, placing a hand over her heart. "Goodbye, Big Eye. Take care of your little one." As she and Jack drove away from the sanctuary, Ellie couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and peace. The road ahead seemed quieter now, the storm long gone. She stared out the window, the memories of the Mustang and his fur playing in her mind like a vivid dream. Jack glanced at her, breaking the silence. "You okay?" Ellie nodded, her voice is steady but soft. "Yeah, I think I am a thirst to let go, but they're where they belong. That's what matters." Jack smiled faintly, his hands steady on the wheel. "You did something amazing." "Ellie, no everyone would have gone as far as you did." Ellie leaned back, in her seether gazes shifting to the horizon. It wasn't just meth. That Mustang had taught me something I'll never forget, about courage, about love, and about never giving up. I didn't stop fighting for his baby, and I couldn't stop fighting for them." The truck rolled on the sanctuary, fading into distance, but Ellie carried their story with her, a reminder of the extraordinary bond between a father and his child, and the power of trust and compassion. Days turned into weeks, and though life at Ridgeview Station returned to its usual rhythm, the story of the Mustang and his foe never left Ellie's heart. She carried their memory like a quiet flame, flickering to life every time she thought of their extraordinary journey. Every few days, Ellie would check her mail for updates from the sanctuary, soon waist drew to her words, ending photos and reports that detailed the Mustang and his foe's progress. Each photo brought a smile to Ellie's face, the fauno visibly stronger, galloping across the fields with newfound energy, the Mustang grazing peacefully, his body relaxed in a way it never had been before. They were thriving, and Ellie couldn't have been prouder one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of purple and orange. Elle found herself sitting at her desk, flipping through the photos she had printed from Susan's updates. Each one told a story of survival, of trust, and of love. Jack knocked on the door frame, breaking her reverie. Still looking at those photos, Shesk, a faint smile playing on his lips. Ellie nodded, holding up one of the most recent pictures. It showed the Mustang standing tall into the field, his foresting at his feet. The caption read, "Father and son, forever together. I can't help it. It's," he said, her voice is off. "They've come severe. It's hard to believe we were part of their story." Jack stepped into the room, crossing his arms as she looked at the photo. "You didn't just help them, Ellie. You saved the man, not just their lives. You saved their bond." That Ellie leaned back in her chair here, eyes misting over. It wasn't just a thought that Mustang he saved his baby first. The founda, she knew what needed to be done, even when the odds were against him. He's their hero. Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a story worth telling." Ellie glanced at him, a spark of inspiration lighting up her face. "You're right," she said. "It is a story worth telling." Over the next few weeks, Ellie began writing down every detail of their journey: the storm, the desperate cry of the Mustang on the road, the fragile life of the fall, and the unbreakable bond between them. She poured her heart into the narrative, weaving together the emotions, the challenges, and the triumphs they had all shared. When she finished, Ellie admitted the story to a local magazine that specialized in animal rescues and human-animal bonds. To her surprise, they loved it, featuring it as the cover story in their next issue. The headline read, "The Mustang Who Wouldn't Give Up a Father's Fight to Save His Father." The story quickly gained attention, spreading across social media and reaching thousands of people who were moved by the Mustang's courage and Ellie's dedication. Comments flooded in from readers who shared their own stories of animals who had touched their lives, and many expressed how the Mustang's journey had inspired them to never give up, no matter the odds. Ellie was overwhelmed by the response, but she knew the credit didn't belong to her alone. The true heroes of the story were the Mustang and his foe, who had shown the world the depth of love and the power of resilience. Months later, Ellie Weiss visited the sanctuary again. The Mustang and his foe were thriving, their bond as strong as ever. The foe had grown into a spirited young horse full of energy and confidence. The Mustang still as majestic as the days she first saw him greeted her with a soft snort as she approached the fence. Ellie leaned against the wooden rail, tears streaming down her face as she watched them. "You've taught more than ever put into words," she whispered, "about love, about courage, and about never giving up." The Mustang stepped closer, his dark eyes eating hers for a moment. It felt as though he understood her gratitude, as though he could feel the depth of her emotions. Ellie smiled, placing a hand over her heart. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." As she drove away from the sanctuary that day, Ellie felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The Mustang and his foe were free, thriving, and together, the way they were always meant to be, and their story shared with the world was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and love could shine through. If this story touched your heart, remember, passion and courage can change lives, whether they're human or animal. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves heartfelt stories. Together, we can spread messages of hope and inspire others to make a difference.